Hello everyone, Rose Pants here, back for another highlight from the Pot Book, which is a complete guide to cannabis. Today we are going to be going over chapter 14, which is How Real is the Risk of Addiction? This chapter is written by Ryan Vandry and Margaret Haney, and they are both PhDs. This chapter is definitely something that is extremely controversial, and after reading and rereading the chapter, it wasn't really something that was deep in my belief, because I don't necessarily agree with everything that's written in this chapter, so I didn't really want to do it as one of my highlights. But then I realized that I'm not making these videos necessarily for myself. I'm making them for other people who wouldn't otherwise have access to this type of information. I grew up in the Bay Area, California. I've just been a part of the cannabis culture. It's always been a part of my life. But there's other people that just don't know this stuff. They should know this stuff, and that is why I'm doing these videos. So because this is a topic that I don't necessarily agree with 100%, I'm not really going to be asserting my opinions 100%. I'm just kind of going to go through the basics of this chapter itself, and then I'm going to rely on you guys down in the comments below to fill in the opinionated side of this and how you guys really feel about this topic. Do you feel that you are addicted to cannabis? Do you feel that it's possible? Do you not feel that it's possible? What do you really think about this topic? They do start out on page 187 stating, "It is uncertain whether this increase in treatment admissions solely reflects the recent change in criminal justice toward more court-ordered treatment, or whether other factors such as increased availability of services or marijuana potency also contribute." So they begin this chapter by saying, you might think it's kind of crazy that there's a chapter on marijuana addiction, because overall in the history it's not really something that's been discussed or was really viewed as a possibility, but there have been recent reports that suggest problems related to marijuana use that can develop for a subset of users, and marijuana users are increasingly enrolling in drug treatment programs. First off, we definitely need to define addiction to begin with if we're going to be discussing this, and if you're going to gauge if you really feel that you're addicted to marijuana. Here's the actual definition. So on page 188 in the Pot Book, addiction refers to use of a substance that causes the user significant impairment or distress and is associated with at least 3 of the following effects within the same 12-month period. 1. Tolerance develops, and that is a need to use more of the drug to get the desired effect, or the same amount of drug has less of an effect than it used to. 2. Withdrawal symptoms occur when use of the drug is stopped and or the drug or other drugs are used to avoid withdrawal symptoms. 3. Larger amounts of the drug are used, or use persists for a longer period of time than was intended. 4. The user reports a persistent desire to reduce use of the drug, or is unsuccessful in attempts to cut down or quit using the drug. 5. A great deal of time is spent in activities surrounding obtaining, using, and recovering from the effects of the drug. 6. Use of the drug interferes with engagement in important social, recreational, or work-related activities. 7. Use of the drug is continued despite knowledge that the drug is likely causing or worsening a health problem. Now the rest of this chapter breaks up into subsections, with the first being tolerance. Tolerance refers to the phenomenon, on page 189 it says, in which following repeated exposures to a drug over time, larger doses of the drug are required to achieve a desired effect, or the same amount of the drug has less of an effect than it used to for a particular user. Tolerance is something that they've been studying for a very long time. They have studies from 1986, 1997, 1976, 1977, 1970, 1973. All of these studies found that tolerance was shown to develop reliably to behavioral, which means general activity levels or task performance, subjective, which is feeling high, and physiological, which is an increased heart rate. And those were the effects of marijuana. Moving on to the subject of withdrawal, people seeking treatment for marijuana-related problems indicated that anger and aggression, anxiety, depressed mood, irritability, irritability, restlessness, sleep difficulty, and strange dreams. Decreased appetite and weight loss are the most common symptoms of marijuana withdrawal symptoms. And that was found in several studies across the board: 1999, 2006, 2005, 1999, 2002. They all kind of found these broad symptoms. These studies also found that withdrawal symptoms are most severe 2 to 4 days later and last approximately 1 to 2 weeks. For me personally, this was the most controversial subsection of this chapter, and that is uncontrolled use. Page 191 says that recent national surveys indicate that among active marijuana users, approximately 40% attempt to either reduce or quit use of marijuana each year. Another thing that studies found was the indication that most commonly reported social or interpersonal problems related to marijuana were spending more time with smoking friends than other friends, lowered self-esteem, worried about feelings of personal isolation or detachment, lacking self-confidence, worried about losing touch with friends or family, difficulty getting the same enjoyment from interests, giving up hobbies because of smoking, and problems between you and your partner. The last subsection of this chapter is use despite physical or psychological problems. On page 192, continuing on to 193, a majority reported they had experienced the following effects as a result of heavy marijuana use: feeling paranoid or antisocial after smoking, memory loss, physical neglect, pains in chest or lungs after a smoking session, feeling depressed for more than a week, or poorer than usual general health. Then they move on to discussing the gateway theory, which, if you're not familiar, suggests that if you first try marijuana, you are automatically more likely to try other drugs. This was kind of one of those moments where I was just like, ugh, because I don't agree. But they concluded that this suggests that it is possible that repeated use of marijuana could make other drugs more rewarding and thus increase the likelihood of developing problematic use patterns. However, much more controlled research would need to be conducted to demonstrate whether this or similar effects could account for the relationship observed between use of marijuana and other drugs, and to identify an exact neurobiological mechanism by which this occurs. So definitely let me know down in the comments below if you have had different experiences with it and if you view it in a different way. Lucas, you can't be up here. I know, it's the best place to be. But in conclusion, to wrap this all up, they say on page 195, in summary, it appears clear that a subset of marijuana users meet the criteria required for diagnosis of drug dependence, which means addiction, as described in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association. While heavy use of a drug does not necessarily indicate an addiction to marijuana, those who are addicted to marijuana likely use it on a daily or nearly daily basis and report experiencing a range of emotional, social, and physiological problems they feel are caused by their marijuana use. As always, now that we've covered another chapter of the pot book, we have fed our minds with cannabis knowledge. We can feed the rest of our cannabinoid system with cannabis and cannabinoids themselves. Join me for next week. I'm actually going to be combining two chapters, 16 and 17. Chapter 16 is Arrest Statistics and Racism, and Chapter 17 is Getting Busted is Not So Funny. Thank you guys so much for joining me, and I will see you guys next week.